Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today we have Zach Bitter with us. So amazing ultra runner from the US. So Zach is 36 years old, lives in Phoenix, Arizona, married to Nicole, who's also an ultra runner. Graduated from University of Wisconsin, studying education, and competed in cross-country and track and field. You're an endurance coach and endurance athlete and coach, sponsored by Ultimate Direction, Kuros, Buff, Altra. You also work for Altra. You're the US 100-mile record holder, which when I was researching you, I had to read all your stats, and I kept sitting back and going, I can't get my head around this time. So you ran 100 miles in 11 hours, 19 minutes, 13 seconds, which was 363 laps around a track. So that's mind-bogglingly impressive in loads of different ways, not just the speed, the distance, but the fact you're running around in circles for 363 times is amazing. So whilst doing that, you also thought, well, whilst I'm here, I might as well carry on for a little bit longer, and you set the US 12-hour record as well at 104.88 miles in 12 hours. I claimed both of those records during the 6 Days in the Dome event in Milwaukee in 2019. 2010 was your first ultra, TNF 50 challenge. I believe, I could be wrong on that, but I think it was the TNF 50 miler. They were offering $1,000 prize, and you thought, I'll have some of that. So let's see if I can actually win it. And I believe you did as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I was a poor college student at the time, so that $1,000 was very appealing.
Yeah, I can imagine. What a way to get into ultra running. My way was nothing like that at all.
There's a funny story behind that too, by the way.
Go for it. Yeah.
My car ended up breaking down like 3 days after that race, so I sunk all $1,000 into getting that thing back up and running.
Did you? Oh, nightmare. So you effectively did it for zero.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's brilliant. So you've raced Western States, JFK, Lake Sonoma, Comrades, Javelina, Tarawera, Desert Solstice 6 times. You ran 100 miles on a treadmill in 12 hours, 9 minutes, and you ran it with a negative split. You excel at long distance, but now you're in Phoenix. I believe you're doing a bit more hilly stuff, more so than you used to.
So my wife and I were in Phoenix for about 4 years, but we just recently moved to Austin, Texas. So we've got what they call hill country here. So you can get some kind of choppy sawtooth kind of like hills out here, but there's not a lot of very long sustainable stuff. But for the purposes of what I'm typically training for, it's plenty. Yeah.
And do you enjoy doing that, or is that a nice welcome break from doing the flat stuff?
Yeah, normally what I like to do is I will kind of pick a flat runnable 100 or a few of them and really kind of like get into that process for maybe a cycle, 2 or 3. But when I feel like I'm in my best groove, I'm usually dropping in like a real dedicated, maybe 4 to 6 months where I'm just going to focus on a more kind of trail mountainy type of course. And I think that just keeps the sport a little more interesting for me, keeps me in touch with that side of the sport as well. So that helps as a coach too, when I'm working with folks who are prioritizing those type of courses. And for me, it's like a mental reset, because, if I go out for like, say, a 3rd cycle of training for something really flat runnable, or even like something like on a track, you do lose a little bit of the edge just from like kind of having gone through that repetition a few extra times. And I think stepping away sometimes actually kind of freshens that up a bit. So that's kind of how I like to structure things.
Yeah. Okay. And one more thing I'll quickly touch on before I ask you about preparation for a big A race was your diet. So your low carb, high fat kind of keto diet, eat plenty of salmon, eggs, red meat, spinach type thing. And you take plenty of supplements as well. One thing I was going to ask you on that was, because you take certain supplements, how do you know when you're deficient in something? How do you get to the point of working that out?
Yeah, so I would say most of the supplements I take are like sports product stuff versus like multivitamin or like micronutrient type supplements. So I do have some of those. I can talk about those, but Most of the supplements I take are kind of like, what am I going to use to fuel this particular workout? So if it's something where I'm working on my race day fueling strategy, which is going to be primarily carbohydrates, for me, it's more about the number of them versus whether to have them or not on race day. So then I'm going to be using that supplement in my long runs, just kind of get used to like what I'll be doing on race day. So like S Fuels Race Plus is kind of my go-to sports product. I'll usually do kind of a 50-50 split between that and some solid food options just to kind of help with the digestion process a little bit. And then, sometimes I'm out there and I am trying to like either confirm or work on like my level of fat adaptation. And then I don't always necessarily want to be going out for a long run without taking on any fuel, especially if I got like another one coming up the next day or something like that. I don't want to dig too big of an energy hole. So then I'll take some like inter-workout fuel that is more kind of fat-based, which there's a product called S Fuels Train that it's just a powder you put in with your bottle, but it's more, fat and a little bit of protein and a very small amount of carbohydrate. So that's kind of how I determine that side of things. And then from just a supplement standpoint in general, I'll take like a packet of Athletic Greens every day, which is just kind of like a green powder that I'll mix in with 8 ounces of water in the morning on an empty stomach. And I think it does a pretty good job of checking it kind of as I guess I could call it like a safety blanket, but generally speaking, I try to program my diet to be fairly well-rounded. And then looking at supplementation as kind of covering my bases in case I make a mistake or if I'm traveling and getting away from my normal like eating routine a little bit, and that sort of stuff. But other than the Athletic Greens, I'll take a magnesium supplement. Just that's just been something that I feel is sometimes a little bit lower in my daily diet, and I have a harder time staying on top and getting enough of that. So having that, and I think magnesium deficiency is pretty well spread in the general populace and then amplified a little bit in endurance athletes. So that's one I'll kind of take on a little more regular basis. Usually I'm getting enough like fish oil and stuff from foods like salmon and things like that, or eggs and stuff. But if I am not eating those foods for a time, sometimes I'll take like a fish oil capsule or something like that too.
Okay. Have you ever taken like a test that's said you are low in this or that?
Yeah,
I've done a generic cheapy test on the internet where I sent off, cut some hair, then they told me I was short on loads of things, but I don't believe it. I think I was swindled.
Yeah, I've never done a hair one. I'll go and get like a blood draw every once in a while just to kind of confirm whether I'm in the right range and stuff. And generally speaking, I'm usually pretty well in range with most things. Every once in a while, I'll have one where I'm like kind of floating near the low end of a range of stuff. So then I'll maybe kind of focus on either introducing some foods that kind of contain higher amounts of that. And then sometimes supplement with some stuff for a little bit if it's something I feel like I might need to buffer up a little bit. But I haven't had a whole lot of issues with that historically where I'm like way out of range on anything. So some runners, usually that is a good first, like if someone's wondering about supplementation, that's a really good first step actually. So like if you don't want to just start throwing things at yourself blindly, getting like a blood test and kind of looking at, well, what things am I clearly hitting well in my normal diet? What things are falling behind or just barely hanging on maybe, and then decide whether it's something you can kind of manipulate with adding different foods into your diet, or if taking a supplement is going to be an easier path forward.
Yeah. And is that sort of thing that you get done at a doctor's? So?
Yeah, it's getting a little easier. I don't know how you guys have it set up in the UK, but generally like you can get like there's companies now that'll even come to your door and draw the blood for you, and then they'll send in a few days like a full breakdown of like your lipid profile, all your different vitamin and micronutrient ranges and things like that. So it's getting easier. I wouldn't say it's something that like everyone is going to be able to easily have access to, but it is something that I think is getting better. And hopefully it'll continue to get even easier. I know a lot of wearable technology and different biometric screening type stuff is getting more and more kind of in-home type of access. So that would be kind of a cool thing for people to be able to see on a little more frequent basis, if that'd be possible, because then you're not playing a whole lot of guessing games at all. You kind of have that information available to you.
Yeah. I often feel as if I must be deficient in certain things, but I never know what. So I've never really known how to go about But there, getting a blood test done sounds like the way to go, a bit more reliable than the other way I tried.
Perhaps, yeah.
That was just it was cheap.
Well, sometimes it's fun to try those things, just see what turns
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
You never know.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you was, lots of people out there, big race coming up in a week's time. So like, and have you got an actual schedule as to how you would go about big races? So say you had an A-goal race coming up in a week and you had to travel to go and stay there. How do you approach that final week? What sort of things do you do if we start from just like a week out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So like 1 week out, I'm basically in full blown taper at that point. I've more or less completely switched the goal of that particular part of my training program into kind of recovery and essentially freshening up for the race. So I will not cease running altogether, but it will be a pretty big reduction in volume. Uh, even if you include the race that usually comes on the weekend, I'm probably going to be like at least a 30 to 40% reduction in volume. With that, if you look at just like say the 5 days leading in, it's probably closer to a 50 to even 60% reduction in volume. But really my guide is I'm just paying attention to how my body feels, how my legs feel. And if I need extra rest, I'll take it. If I feel pretty good and want to kind of spin the wheels a little bit, I'll go out for some short runs. Usually I'm trying to keep at least 1 or 2 sessions in there that week where I'm going to be kind of targeting race specific intensity. So that's where it gets a little bit creative depending on the race distance. So like, most people in endurance sports are not running 100-milers, they're running more Olympic distance stuff. So for them, that might be like an abbreviated workout, say like on a Tuesday, where they're just not looking for like a stimulus that is going to actually benefit them from a improvement standpoint, but just exposing their body to like race pace, and you're doing it at a very reduced volume so that you're not necessarily stressing your body, but just kind of reminding your legs of what it's going to be doing in a few days. So for like 100-mile races, that's essentially like kind of right around my aerobic threshold. So it's pretty much like a zone 2 kind of relatively easy paced run, maybe 45 to 60 minutes in duration. And I'll maybe do 1 or 2 of those during that week. Other than that, I'm really focusing on trying to get sleep. So, I don't feel like there's a huge value add in necessarily worrying about getting great sleep the night before an event, because that can be a little bit hit or miss, depending on kind of, a variety of different things. That's something I guess I've improved greatly on as I got into the sport. I remember the first couple ultras I ran, I slept maybe between 2 to 4 hours the night before. And now I can usually get a good 6 to 8 hours of sleep the night before a race. And kind of show up with a more normal sleep schedule. But my value with sleep, I think, is kind of those days before that night before. If I could be getting good sleep there, that's going to be money in the bank, so to speak. And it becomes kind of I treat it like I would a workout. So like rather than going into the week thinking, okay, here's like the key sessions I need to be prepared for and ready for and plan around in order to make sure they can be optimized, I'm thinking the same way with, all right, I need to be in bed at the right time. I need to be doing the right things the hours before bed so that I can kind of practice good sleep hygiene. So like keeping the room nice and dark, keeping maybe a little cooler, not staring at screens right up before I go to bed. Things like that are going to kind of like, kind of mellow me down a little bit and get me nice and restful. And then the other side of it is just kind of like how I kind of like program my nutrition. So as you mentioned, I kind of follow a little bit more of a low carbohydrate diet, although the carbohydrates do fluctuate depending on where I am in training. And then I have a specific protocol of kind of what I would do a week before a race. So when I'm about a week out, I will actually go quite low carb, about as low as I ever will, for a few days, probably 3, 4, maybe at most 5 days. And then when I get about 48 hours out from the race itself, or about 2 days out from the race itself, I'll start bringing back some of the carbohydrate, probably around maybe 30% of my intake for those days. And then the morning of the race, if it's like a 100-miler, I'll be sticking to mostly like very low volume fats and proteins, because I want to start the race like encouraging my body to be burning high rates of fat at the intensity I'm going to run at. And then once I'm about 45 minutes into the race, I'll start kind of trickling in some carbohydrate sources to defend muscle glycogen during it. But that's more or less the week leading in for me.
And do you I don't know, people have certain routines. Like, do you make sure have you washed your shoes in the week before so they're all clean? Do you wear them in the few days before, or have you prepared all your kit several days and you don't touch it until race day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think when you're traveling for a race, it becomes even more important because I mean, everyone's been in the situation where they decide to pack the night before their morning flight, and then they get on the flight and they're like, oh no, I forgot my forgot my
Yeah,
lucky pair of socks or whatever.
yeah,
So I like to kind of, if it's like a Saturday race, I like to kind of pack like say on Wednesday or something like that, and then I'll basically probably remember about 90% of the stuff I actually need. And then I have a couple days to kind of think about like, all right, what did I forget? And then as I remember it, I can throw it in the bag. And then I usually find myself more or less prepared come race day. But for shoes and things like that, I definitely like to have at least a run or two in them, depending on the model. Most of the shoes I run in, I can pretty much go right out the box with. So it's not that big of a deal for me personally, but I think that is generally a good piece of advice. Like, take out, even if it's just for a couple easy runs before the race itself, have them on, or if you're going to wear them around for a day, maybe. But generally, like, I mean, most people probably have a routine when they're transitioning into a new pair of shoes that they kind of know what works well for them.
yeah,
It's fairly unlikely that you're going to buy a pair of shoes and then head out for your long run in them right out the box in most cases. So I
yeah.
think you probably think about it about the same way with a race.
Yeah. So you've never had issues with a pair straight out the box. So you don't need to do 30-mile kind of break them in kind of session. They've always been good for you.
Yeah, for the most part. And it's pretty rare that I'm going into a race with a pair of shoes that I've never worn before.
Yeah.
So a lot of times once I get, say, 6 to 8 weeks out from the race, I'm starting to really switch focus towards my primary goal is building up kind of my race specific intensity, which is just oftentimes long run development or back-to-back long run development. So as I'm doing that, as I get closer and closer, I'm getting more specific with everything as to what I'm going to do on race day, just so I have a chance to kind of either reconfirm how it works, try out something new if something's not working the way I want it to, or work in something new that I haven't raced in before that I think is going to be a value add comparatively to what I had done in the past. And that usually gives me like quite a bit of opportunities to kind of stress test whether a pack is fitting right or whether a pair of shoes I'm going to use on race day is going to feel good. And or like maybe something as simple as, do I want to have another pair of shoes there in case I need to change out of this pair because I think it's going to be a great shoe, but there's a chance it's not going to be something I want to wear the entirety of this event. And all that stuff, I'm essentially using my race specific long runs to kind of to work through. So come race morning, the pair of shoes I'm going to wear is more often than not going to be something that I've had on my feet for a few long runs and double digit hours before. And
Right.
usually I'm probably going to start with a different pair of that model. But like I said, I'll maybe put like 10, 15 miles on them just to kind of
Yeah.
make sure there's not any like weird issue. Cause every once in a while a shoe might just come out of the factory different for whatever reason and it breaks down. And you don't want to have that happen midway through your race. So thankfully the shoe manufacturing is pretty solid and that's not something people should be concerned about or worried about necessarily, but it's it's not impossible. So I like to try to not leave a whole lot of stones unturned going into a race that you prepared for say 4 to 6 months.
Yeah. Have you changed shoes during races often, or is that a rarity for you?
Yeah, it's a pretty big rarity. I think I've maybe only changed shoes in a race a couple of times. There's been some races where I wish I would have, and they were kind of earlier in my racing career, and I didn't necessarily have like the logistical infrastructure to do it. It's like I've traveled out to a race in a different state by myself and you're kind of self-crewing. And then in that scenario, it's kind of hard unless you have a drop bag and then it times it up. Right. And usually it's more weather related stuff. Like the anticipation wasn't going to be that the trails are going to be soaking wet or something like that. But usually I don't have a whole lot of issues with shoes kind of needing to be changed for me personally. I've done it a couple times. Sometimes it's been just because like I'm having a rough go of it at the race. And it's like, okay, I'm going to switch out of this slightly less comfortable, but perhaps a little more performance skewed shoe for something a little more comfortable because my A and B goal have already been thrown out the window and I'm just getting to the finish line at this point. But generally speaking, when I'm kind of like clicking on all cylinders and the race is going well, like changing my shoe doesn't even cross my mind for the most part.
Right. Yeah. And travel kind of time, how many days before if you've got to get to somewhere where you're going to need to stay in accommodation, how many days before do you actually travel? Do you
Yeah,
like to have 3 or 4 days rest and like have your feet up a little bit, or is it you get there the day before?
I've done it every way you can essentially at this point, and I've had good luck and bad luck with every way, I guess. So I'm not sure if I have like necessarily a proven method, but I'll tell you what kind of sticks in my head is what I kind of like from just maybe a personality side of things is as long as it's not a massive time zone change, as long as it's like a couple hours or so only, I like to get there, say like midday Thursday before like a Saturday race. So
Oh,
two
that's
nights
fairly
before.
close. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then it's like, I feel like if I get out there like super early, I just kind of end up sitting there, like kind of breaking my routine, being less efficient with other areas of my life, which generally isn't as big of a deal if I plan for it, but it just gives you time to kind of like maybe overly obsess on stuff. So if I get there kind of mid-afternoon on a Thursday, can get into the hotel or the accommodations by late afternoon, early evening, kind of relax for a few hours, get a good night's sleep Thursday night, and then have all day Friday essentially to kind of like start the process of thinking about what I want to do the next day and making sure I have all my stuff prepared and just double checking things. That's usually a pretty like kind of casual way for me to go about it. I don't feel like I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs, stressing about things I shouldn't be stressing about, but I also have enough time to kind of double check and feel confident that my strategy and plan is in place the way I want it to be.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And what sort of, I keep seeing the Ultra sign on your t-shirt is just jumping out to me. I've got some friends that run in Ultra. I've never used Ultra, but what sort of models is it you're wearing at the moment?
Yeah, so the shoe industry as a whole has had a really big shift essentially over the last 6 years almost at this point, if you want to go back to like the original prototypes. But we kind of went from ultra running was different because I think, you're out there for a long time. So people aren't going to probably in most cases wear a kind of a racing flat like you'll see in like 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons and marathons. I was maybe a little different with that is I did spend quite a bit of time early in my ultra running career, kind of building up the lower leg foot strength to be able to tolerate a very low profile responsive shoe on race day. So I've run into some nearly minimalist shoes for 100 milers in the past.
Okay.
But now the technology has shifted where we have like a midsole foam that actually makes the max cushion versions of that type of product better for performance than say even a minimalist like racing flat, which historically would have been probably your best performance shoe purely from a like a response off the ground type of a framework.
Yeah.
So that's kind of shifted the game a little bit. It's the technology is good enough where you're definitely giving yourself a disadvantage if you're not racing in it. So Ultra is just recently released their version of a super shoe. So that's what I've been kind of like gearing up to racing now versus what I maybe would have in the past. Assuming it's a road or a track or something. I think once you get on trails, especially kind of very, very terrain, undulating, steep, technical stuff, I don't think that technology is necessarily transitioned over into that type of terrain quite efficiently yet. But for the stuff that I'm typically preparing for, that's kind of my race day shoe. I do think there's value in keeping very strong lower legs and maybe not letting certain areas of your body atrophy from wearing like a super built up product all the time. So I try not to use that product excessively in training. I'll use it for some key sessions. I'll use it for some key build up long runs like we talked about before, as I'm kind of like checking all the boxes of what I want to do on race day and confirming that it is what I want to do. But a lot of times I'll be in, say, on the road. So there's a model called the Escalante Racer that I like quite a bit. It's a pretty nimble shoe, a little bit of a more firm midsole, gets a good pop off the ground, definitely activates your lower leg muscles a little more aggressively than the average running shoe will. So that one usually finds its way into my rotation a fair bit when I'm trying to kind of build up that lower leg strength.
Okay. How long have Ultra been about? Because I've only really came across them a couple of years ago, and as I say, I've never used them, so I don't really know a lot about Ultra.
Yeah, so they actually were founded in 2010, and it was a really like literally a garage story. Like the founders kind of put together their first pair of shoes and were working out of like out of the garage or their basement, so to speak, and then grew the product where they had a couple models that got popular enough where they could order inventory and sell. And they did that for a couple of years, and then they were acquired by a company called Icon Health and Fitness, which was later purchased by Vanity Fair Corp. So for those people kind of wondering, Vanity Fair owns a lot of different outdoor brands like North Face, Smart Wool, Icebreaker, Vans, Dickies, like a lot of these type of products. So now they have a rather large parent company. So they're starting to grow quite a bit more now that they have those kind of resources behind them. But from a full philosophical standpoint, they've remained fairly true to, I think, their original roots, which is like they want to have a balanced platform, which means your heel and your forefoot are the same distance off the ground, not necessarily doing that by eliminating all the cushion, which we see kind of in a middle shoe, but by more or less taking a traditional running shoe and adding cushion to the forefoot so that it's balanced out. And then from there, you can get a variety of different stuff from low profile to max cushion. Their other kind of key feature is their foot shaped toe box. So rather than kind of tapering in on both sides and kind of pinching your big toe and your little toe inwards towards the other three toes, it kind of has an ergonomic wrap around that. And then it tapers in to kind of hug your midfoot and your heel. So you're locked in, but your toes are really nice and free. I really like that aspect. That's kind of what sold me on their product in the first place, was that foot shaped toe box. I like to have that toe freedom and be able to splay my toes out and really channel that power that you're going to drive through that big toe with that extra space there.
Right. Have you ever thought of, well, has the brand ever thought of putting in so like different thickness insoles or anything to help people transition to a zero drop?
Yeah, that has been discussed. I think the nice thing, I guess, about that is it's really more about an education thing for people than it is about actually providing that as the brand, because there's just a lot of different, I mean, there's some great like insert companies, and there's even companies that make specific products for that, where you get like a little heel cup and it actually comes in layers where you can start it out at like 8 millimeters and peel off a layer and bring it down to 6, peel off another, bring it down
so
to 4.
I've glued different insoles together just to make different sort of ramps, because I'm not a zero drop kind of runner, but you'd like to try and get there somehow.
Yeah. And I think and then that's actually funny you say that, because the founder Golden Harper actually suggested that. He's like, hey, we're in a pinch, if you need a transition, just take an old insole out of your old shoe and cut the back part off of it and slide it in there, and that's going to give you that heel raise. And I see that from time to time where people are like, I really want this foot shaped toe box, but I'm worried. I've been in a 12 millimeter offset my whole life. I'm have Achilles tendonitis issues. I don't want to necessarily like jump straight into this. Generally speaking, what we've seen is when someone is maintaining or adding cushion to their Altra footwear shoe comparatively to what they had on before, that transition and that like issue of kind of catching up your lower legs is very greatly reduced. So if someone's in, say, like a shoe that has like a 24 millimeter stack height, and then they go and they buy a pair of Ultras, if they buy a pair of Ultras that has that or more, I usually say go up if you're concerned at all. So maybe they buy a pair of Ultras that has a 30 millimeter stack height. So they're changing one variable. They're going to balance cushioning, but they're not reducing the cushion itself. Usually when people run into injury issues, it's because they're changing multiple variables from one shoe to the next versus just one. But then I think you can just treat it like you would any shoe, where it's a new shoe, you haven't worn it before, wear it around for a day, see how it feels on your foot, take it out for a very easy run, a short run first. Don't jump into your biggest workout of the week with it right out the gate, and listen to your body. Treat it like you would a weight room. Like if I go into the weight room and do like lower body lifts and I'm really sore the next day, I'm not going back to do lower body lifts again that next day. So if you put on a pair of Ultra footwear shoes, next day your lower legs are maybe a little sore than they normally are, give them a break for a day or two, let that heal up, then do it again. And you're going to build up that lower leg strength. And I like to say that's the long-term solution, because the stronger those lower legs are, the more activated those muscles are, the better they are going to stay healthy and happy for you in the long term when you put them through a stressor like an ultra marathon.
Yeah. Okay. So nipping back to your pre-race week, so like your checkpoints and split times, do you have those kind of like, do you know exactly where you want to be for certain times? So do you have them written down, or do you just remember them mentally, or do you just go with the flow and see how your body's feeling?
Yeah, this is going to range a little bit depending on the course. So like you have a race like Western States where actually my wife's a great example for this. She's been 6th place there twice and 7th once. And when she's been 6th place, she's been 2 hours faster one time than the other. So it had nothing to do with like the field being that much weaker on the slower year. It had everything to do with there was a ton of snow in the high country. It was blazing hot in the canyons. And it was just a really slow year because of all of that. So when it's a race like that, I'm definitely paying more attention to like, is this the appropriate effort for what I'm ready for today? Because I want to avoid a situation where I'm giving back, say, 2 minutes for every one that I made up for in the beginning if I go out too fast.
Yeah.
If it's more of a course like what I traditionally am peaking for, like say a looped course or a 400-meter track course like that, those can be way more precise because weather is going to be fairly consistent. The terrain is identical. You've seen the whole course after the
Yeah.
first couple of minutes. And, that has its pros and cons. For one, it's like if you do slow down, it's you. It's not that hill that came up. So, but then exactly where your paces are. So for those particular events, what I'll usually do is I'll gauge what kind of fitness I think and pick a goal time. And then I'll look at splits for whatever length of the loop is and give myself kind of like, this is the most aggressive I should ever be going at any given time, other than maybe like the closing portion of the race if I'm feeling really good.
Yeah.
And this is the slowest I can go to still maintain the goal I'm trying to hit. And then I'm just trying to kind of land in there, somewhere in there. And if
Are
I
you
start
remembering all this in your head, or do you have these written down somewhere?
Yeah, I'll remember in my head, but it's pretty simple because if it's like a 400-meter track, I'll just know, like, say I want to hit between a minute 38 and a minute 41 or something like that per lap.
Yeah, and that's the same every lap. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it's quite easy at that point because most of these events now they'll have like a timing mat set out there on the track. So every time you cross a lap, you can see your split, and then they'll put like a really big screen, maybe 15, 20 meters after you cross that map. So I could, in theory, look and see every one of my splits all day long. Practically speaking, I think that just drives a lot of mental fatigue. So, you get 400 plus of those, and it's you kind of have to kind of concede to spot checking is the way I like to call it. So I'll check the first few laps, make sure I'm not aggressively outside of my range, dial it in. And once I kind of get that feel for like, okay, this is what it feels like to be in range, I'll just roll with that for a bit. And then I'll spot check and see, am I still in range? Yep. Okay, keep going. Spot check, still in range. Yep, keep going. Spot check, out of range, adjust, and then recalibrate. So really the only time I'm checking like frequently is when I'm out of that range and I'm trying to recalibrate and get myself back into it.
Yeah. And do you ever alter your, well, what I'm trying to say, where if somebody else goes out a bit quicker, do you change your pace sometimes, or do you just stick with your own race goal?
Yeah, usually I'll stick to my goal. I mean, it's with ultra running, I think most ultra runners are going out too fast. And I think we see this.
One can take and drag others with them, can't they? And then half a dozen are going too fast.
Mm-hmm. Where it gets difficult is when you get these super competitive fields where let's say there's like 10, 15 guys on that starting line who could potentially win or threaten for a podium spot or something like that. If every one of those guys goes out like right on razor's edge comparatively of what they're probably capable of, or even maybe a little bit past, chances are like one or two are going to hold on and have the race of their life. So in a scenario like that, you probably need to maintain some contact and not let them, if you're going for the win anyway. I mean, you get races like Western States or UTMB where you could easily say like, I'm going to target third place and run really smart because I know if I start out in like even 30th place and just maintain my effort throughout the day, I'm going to pass a ton of people who blow up, and that might take winning off the table, but it leaves the podium like a little more guaranteed, I guess. So sometimes the tactics, I think, get down to that. For the track stuff, it's such a kind of a niche aspect of the sport, and it's such a small field relative to what you're going to get in a lot of the trail races because you can only put so many people on a track. It's pretty rare that I'm kind of gauging my race pacing off of somebody else other than where I'm at. And for those events too, like the beauty of it is everything is basically controlled. And that's kind of why you do it. You go there for the purpose of kind of eking out every last second that you can get from your body from a speed standpoint. And with that, I think comes a little more easy to predict goal pace with your long runs. I've done enough of them now where I kind of have a little better gauge of like, well, if I'm hitting these splits on like my final 3 back-to-back long run sessions, I can more or less be confident that I'm going to be able to do that on race day as long as I don't have anything like unpredictable happen or something that if I make a mistake, like either nutritionally or something like that, perhaps could lead to a difference there. But generally speaking, it's a little easier to predict what a sustainable pace is. And in that case, I kind of know like, hey, if there's someone else out on the track and they're going out 5 seconds per lap faster than this, it doesn't pay for me to chase them, because even if, even if they, if they nail that and keep going, I'm going to blow up in the process. So it's like, it doesn't do me any good to get beat even further, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, what kind of point did it dawn on you that you really loved running around in circles? Like lots of people, they're going to struggle mentally. I've done a long 4-mile loop course, and I'm not going to do it again. Let's put it that way. But you're doing it on a track. It's like, how do you come mentally?
Yeah, I think maybe maybe I went in with a little bit more of like a naivety that wasn't cemented in my head from too many years of like track racing in the past. I mean, I definitely did track and cross country in high school and college. Although in college, I only did 2 years of track. So I wasn't really beaten down by the track. I think you get a lot of times you can see people who come into doing ultra marathons because they're maybe a little bit sick of doing track stuff again. So the idea of then just transitioning onto more loops around a track isn't quite appealing. They're there for the trails, so to speak. So I think maybe there's a little bit of a negative or a fear of just like the monotony, or just maybe not a fear, but just like kind of, I'm not really interested in doing that. And there's some value in, I think, with ultra running, picking the event that motivates you, because there's going to be multiple points where you have to push through where you think you're capable of at the time. And if you don't want to be out there, it's going to be just that much more difficult to do that. So for me though, I enjoyed the aspect of that training being very easy to replicate wherever I lived. So I grew up in the Midwest, didn't have access to mountains, ran a lot of flat roads. So there was a lot of specificity that went into picking a race that kind of was closer to that. Then I just kind of got maybe a little bit lucky where the first track 100-miler I did went really well. So I had a pretty positive first experience. So then I was building off something positive versus something negative. And I just got really interested in kind of thinking, oh, if I can control a lot of these variables that are typically not predictable in ultra running, even for the same course one year to the next, it gives me a little bit better of an idea of whether I'm making improvements or not. It gives me a little bit of a better view of whether what I'm doing in training is actually driving me heading in the right direction, or if I'm like not doing the right things. So I think that part of the sport has almost always been a big driving force. Maybe not always the primary driving force. I would say now it is. So I really like that aspect of it. So that kind of keeps me coming back to those type of events.
Yeah. And like I said, you've done Western, which is obviously a world away from running around a track. You're much more of a track kind of runner. What's the appeal on doing mountainous runs for you?
Yeah, I think part of it is, I mean, the sport has such a culture in there, at least I'm sure over in Europe, and definitely over in Europe as well, but it's like, it's such a big part of the community that I like to kind of engage with that. And then I'm interested in seeing like what I can do on some of these courses. And it does offer up a really interesting buildup. So if I do say like 3 track 100-milers in a row, by that third time, it's getting pretty predictable as to what I need to do. And I'm really, really shaving off very small margins of improvement, to the point where like you're seeing a very small move in the right direction as a huge win. Yeah. Versus if I am not training on the trails for a year plus, and then I decide I'm going to do the San Diego 100-mile like I did in 2019. I have like a 4 to 6 month buildup that is quite a bit different, not only in terrain, but in the way I kind of improve along the way. And that's kind of exciting to have kind of those bigger moving improvements too. So I kind of it kind of goes back to like why I actually like the flat stuff too, where there is, it's the process as much as anything of just kind of seeing yourself kind of develop and improve along the way, and hit benchmarks and things like that are kind of really motivating and exciting for me. And they stimulate my curiosity quite a bit. So pulling out of something that I've maybe done a little more frequently and it's a little more predictable into something that's a little more uncertain or unknown, I think is kind of like right in line with like the ultra marathon ethos, as well as just kind of a, fun way to kind of make the sport and keep the sport exciting and sustainable. I don't know that I would be as excited about doing ultra marathons as long as I have, or as long as I would like to if I were only doing, say, track ultras.
Yeah. It just keeps it more interesting. Have you ever thought about doing the UTMB at all?
Yeah, I'd like to get out there at some point. It's now that I'm in Austin, I would definitely have a harder time preparing for it. Although the summers in Austin are pretty miserable from a weather standpoint. So
Is that just with the heat? Or?
Yeah, it gets really humid here. So
Right.
in Phoenix, we had the heat for sure. It was just dry heat. So now, like in the summer, you might get like a day where it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit and like really, really humid. So just that muggy. I'm sure you get a lot of that too with the cloud and fog and stuff. Um, so I think like my wife and I will probably get out of Austin for big chunks of time during the summer at times. So there'll maybe be a year where I decide to do UTMB and then say, okay, I'm just gonna spend a couple months before we leave for that, like up in Colorado or something, and actually train on trails that are a little more specific to that type of course, and get out there and give it my best shot. But I mean, even if I don't do that, it would be fun to do it sometime just to say I covered that route, because it's such an iconic course and event in the sport.
Yeah. And just being there for race week itself is just such a buzz. I'm sure it is in loads of races for the States. Be the same for Western, I would imagine.
Yeah. There's definitely a buildup of anticipation as you get like a couple of weeks in, and then you get like the people first showing up a few days before, and you get all the festivities and seeing people that you haven't seen in maybe a year, and having all that kind of culture from it surrounding it. So yeah, if nothing else, it'd be cool to come out and just see that side of it, even if there's no racing involved.
Yeah. And how many when you said just before you'd potentially do 300 tracks, one after the other, is that in a year, or how many of these big events do you do in a 12-month period?
Yeah, usually for like a calendar year, I'm looking at it as I probably can do 2 or 3 A races. And then I like to set it up where I pick an A race 4 to 6 months out, and then build in a couple kind of tune up or fun races in the meantime that I'm going to more or less use as like very high quality long runs, essentially. So I'll maybe end up on like a really good year, a non-pandemic year, I guess you could say. I'm probably going to be doing, say, 6 to 8 races in the ultra marathon distance, but only probably 2 or 3 of them are going to be ones where I'm there like specifically fully tapered, ready to kind of wring myself dry, and then take a good solid 2 weeks or so, like kind of off or unstructured afterwards. Whereas like I might show up to, like I just recently went and did the Brazos Bend 50K, which was a fun kind of relatively local race to where I live. It wasn't one where I was going to taper for or spend a significant amount of time recovering from outside of what I would normally do for a high quality long run. But it was worth kind of going there so I can kind of remind myself of what do I do like the days before, how does the routine work about getting to sleep at night the night before, morning of, and just get all that like race day aid station navigation things, just kind of repractice some of that. And it's sometimes a little bit more fun to kind of be in that event atmosphere versus just kind of heading out your backyard and doing a solo long run or something like that.
Yeah. You touched on it just there. So like the morning of a race, so like how far in advance do you have your food, for instance? What's your plans there?
Yeah, I'll usually try to get some food in maybe like 2 hours or 90 minutes at the tightest before the start. I'm usually going very low volume, very high calorie like types of stuff, so it doesn't sit in my stomach all that harsh even if it is close. So it might be something as simple as like heavy cream and coffee with a scoop of protein powder in there, and it's basically all liquid at that point. Or like a couple spoons of nut butter or something like that along with it if I'm still kind of hungry.
So it's nothing too substantial, and it's all pretty.
Yeah. I like to have an empty stomach when I start, but I don't want to have a hungry stomach, if that makes sense. So something that's kind of low volume, high calorie usually gets me in that spot pretty easily.
Okay. And what sort of time? Well, I suppose it's different with each different race, but do you get races where you've got to get up? It's like 3 a.m, or what sort of times do you have to get up beforehand? Lots of people struggle with they've gone to bed the night before, they're nervous, they're not going to sleep well, and then they've got to get up at a silly o'clock to have a 6 o'clock sort of start time. what sort of times are most of your races?
Yeah, there's definitely some of those 5 a.m. starts. I mean, Western States is like that. So you're getting up at like 3 in the morning. I think the worst one's maybe Leadville. I think that's 4 in the morning they start. And then if you're coming like from a different time zone or something like that, it's just like you can't really count on much sleep at all that night before. So this is why I like to really kind of prioritize sleep, say like the nights before that final night. I think if you can get really good rest then it's not as big of an issue if like you're pretty restless that night before. But you kind of got to operate with the starting point. And what I like to do is think like, well, it's not like I'm starting at 5 a.m. and everyone else gets to sleep in until 8. We're all going to get up before we want to. So it normalizes it a little bit. Fortunately, for some of the more kind of like time trial-esque, like record chasing type events that I've done, they've been a little more friendly. So like Desert Solstice has always started at 8 a.m. 6 Days in the Dome, which is where I ran 11:19, started at 9 a.m. I believe. So you do get a little more flexibility to be able to sleep in a bit more relative to what you would normally do for those events, which has been kind of nice.
Yeah, and you've done Desert Solstice 6 times, haven't you? So, but is there a certain draw to go back to that one? Why do you keep doing that one so often?
Yeah, I like it for a couple of reasons. One, it was the first track ultra I did, so there's a little bit of nostalgia from that. And then it's just really well organized. I mean, Ara Vipa and Jamil Curry, the race director for that, he very much started kind of what I would like to say the resurgence of like record chasing events on kind of the road track side of things. So I like to acknowledge that like he was a little bit of a modern day pioneer in kind of reigniting that interest. He kind of built that event so that it would be kind of highlighted with everyone's here for a reason, whether that's chasing an age group 50K or an outright 100-mile record or something like that. That's the idea behind that. And it's low field counts, so there's maybe a little bit less lane 2 time. I think the only variable I've really not been able to very finely control with these track ultras is they are oftentimes in the context of longer stuff from what I'm doing. So then by default, you're going to have a bunch of people out there running slower because they're just pacing for longer events. And track protocol, the passer goes outside, even if you only have 20 people on the track, once it spreads out, you're going to be in lane 2, lane 3 sometimes. So it does add up. But that Desert Solstice does a fairly good job of kind of controlling. They don't let this field size get too aggressively large. Yeah, so I mean, I think I just really like the kind of the way it's structured. December in Phoenix is pretty predictable weather-wise. It's pretty rare that it's going to push above 70 degrees. You get some pretty direct sun some years, but it's fairly predictable weather-wise, and that's kind of nice to know. Like if you're going to decide 4-6 months ahead of time to do it, you're not going to necessarily have to like be like planning for, well, maybe it'll be freezing cold or maybe it'll be scorching hot like you have in some race situations.
Yeah. And how many people, when you say they don't let the field get too big in relation to like trail ultras, you can have thousands of people on some of them. So how many people do you have on track ultras? Like 20, something like that? Or
20 would be a pretty fortunate day, I would say. I think Solstice caps at 40, and sometimes they'll keep it smaller than that, but I think they give themselves the flexibility to go up to that big if they decide like there's enough interested people who hit the standards to do a big race like that. I mean, I've been on some track events that have had a 60, and that's getting a little too crowded. I think when it's 60, I'm probably in lane 3, even a lot of times going around groups of people. So I try to kind of avoid it if it's, at least if I'm going for like a real big push towards a record time or something like that, avoid it getting much above 40.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's pretty much most of my questions, but I'd be mad just not to touch on your 11:19. So like, have you any plans for going back and trying to beat that at all, or are you
There's a couple things like I've always told myself, like, I mean, one of my big goals with the controlled 100-mile stuff is that when I run my last race or my last competitive race, to be able to walk away and just say, yeah, I found my fastest self in this particular event. So when I thought about kind of how that day went, there was loads of positives, obviously, but I do think I can run faster. So that is a big driver to get back out there and try to improve that time. I also did it with the old shoe technology. So there is a little bit of a curiosity as to, where will I get now that, I mean, running is kind of in that like steel frame to carbon frame bike spot right now where we're kind of slowly but surely getting every shoe brand up to speed to have a product that kind of is relatively comparable to the technology that Nike first came out with in 2016. So
we're talking plates here, aren't we?
Plates are, they get a lot of the attention, but a lot of it's actually the midsole foam. So the plates play a role in there, but really the big, like when you see these studies that are reporting like 2 to 8% performance boost from the shoes, it's mostly that midsole foam. Essentially what's happening is historically, as you would compress into the foam, you'd lose a certain amount of energy. This new foam has such a good response that you're actually like, you're losing much less. So that's where that extra performance is coming out of. But yeah, so like, I mean, you're seeing estimates that are like pretty big when you're starting to stretch out to the distances as far as 100 miles. So, part of me is kind of curious as to like what that will do for my PR comparatively. So I'm happy I did the race I did in the old pairs, because that's kind of how I started my career, and that's where I've been able to kind of like continually measure my progress with. So being able to have a race like I did in 2019 in the old shoe technology is, I think, something that I'll like to have as I think back on my running career. But as the sport evolves, you kind of got to evolve with it. So that'll add to maybe the excitement to kind of keep trying for a few more years at least.
Yeah, definitely. So just to finish up on, I normally ask folk, do you have any kind of suggestions for people out there for 2 or 3 different kind of exercises that will benefit their running? So help stave off injuries or just help strengthen certain areas. What's something that somebody could do which is easy to work into their routine?
Yeah. Okay. This is a great question. So I think when it comes to like strength work, if we're going outside of like the actual running specific workouts, I would say like starting out focusing on just a good, consistent strength routine. It doesn't have to be anything like crazy or like overly different. I think just some of the standard like go-to foundational movements like squats, deadlifts. I think if you haven't been in a weight room or worked with a trainer to develop form, you can do things like Bulgarian split squats or like hex bar lifts, which are going to kind of like minimize the learning curve a little bit, so you don't hurt yourself trying to avoid it in the first place. But just single leg stuff like single leg squats and things like that, or box steps, I think can be good, because it's not uncommon for people to have an imbalance, and you can really identify that. I know when I first got a little more structured with strength work, one thing I recognized pretty quickly was that when I did single leg stuff, my left leg was stronger than my right leg. So that told me, okay, I should probably give that some attention and try to balance that out a little bit. That's kind of a good starting point, I think, for people. Then if you want to kind of like, if let's say someone's listening, it's like, I already do that stuff. What's something cool and exciting that I maybe haven't heard of before? There's a couple spots I really like to pay attention to. And one is hip flexor strength workout, partly because it is a big driver in your running performance, but it's a small muscle. So you have this situation where if you get that hip flexor nice and strong and resilient, then it can go a lot of ways from performance, because it's just not going to be a muscle like your glutes, your quads, your hamstrings, where they can get quite large if you start hitting them. Runners probably don't have to worry about this so much, because it's just, you're running so much that the chances of you getting big in any capacity is not that common. But this hip flexor muscle is like, its strength development to size building is going to be like in a favor of a power weight ratio thing. And then tibialis stuff, a lot of runners deal with things like shin splints and problems with that ankle flexion and stuff like that. And tibialis raises, or weighted tibialis raises, and weighted hip flexor raises are, I think, really good things that people can add to their strength.
What would be a weighted hip flexor raise? Could you describe that?
Yep. There's 2 ways I like to do it. One is like, I have this one, you can make this yourself if you don't have access to it, but I use this thing called monkey feet, where it's like this little apparatus you strap to your foot, and then it actually clips to a dumbbell. So you can it's like almost like this half a boot that you clip onto your foot, and then it has a weight that you can put on the bottom of it. And I'll stand with one leg on like something like an elevated block, like maybe 6 inches off the ground. And then you just lift that leg up, drive that knee up the way you would drive your leg up if you're running uphill. It's kind of the same thing. If you don't have access to that, you can actually use like different rubber or like resistance bands things or athletic tape or something and harness it to your foot if you really want to. But probably a little easier than that is to get like a resistance band and anchor that to like a door frame or something, and actually lay on your back far enough from it so the resistance band is somewhat taut, and then just pull that towards you while you're on your back. It's kind of driving your knee up towards your chin as much as you can. So both of those are going to create the resistance as you're pulling your hip flexor or your knee up towards your upper body. Those are kind of the ways I like to do that particular move.
Right. Okay, no, that's great. Just any information to help runners to improve, keep fitness, get stronger is always great to hear. So
yeah,
brilliant. Thanks very much for all of that, Zach. That's amazing amount of knowledge you've helped push out there to loads of people. So thanks very much for coming along and having the chat on the channel. So
yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
for watching, everyone, and yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Take care.